welcome to the first in what Wozen Studio intends to be a series of discussions and events marking this community's conscious participation and constant rethinking of the changes that we're all experiencing in our lives in Lisbon. My name is Joanna, and I'm really only here I started to put a frame around this particular conversation. Before we begin, I would like to invite Vitor Coias of the Fórum do Patrimônio in Aveiro to join us up here at the front. The Fórum do Patrimônio has offered support to this event, and so we wanted to give them a brief opportunity to introduce a little bit what they do, because it has infinite intersections with what we're here tonight to do. So, Vitor, please tell us a little bit about the Fórum do Patrimônio da Lisboa.
Portanto, eu estou aqui como representação do Fórum do Património. O Fórum do Património é uma iniciativa de associativismo que visa agregar não cidadãos, mas associações de cidadãos. Portanto, somos, no fundo, um movimento associativo de associações. O Fórum reuniu-se pela primeira vez em 2017, na cidade de Lisboa, e houve cerca de 40 associações que assinaram uma declaração final, desculpe, gosto de ter parte do tempo para vocês aqui deste lado, que assinaram uma declaração final com um conjunto de linhas de ação em relação àquilo que os cidadãos agregados nas associações devem fazer. Portanto, o Fórum apoia com todo o prazer esta nossa iniciativa. É uma iniciativa curiosa. Eu não sou artista, sei que estou a falar para a parte das pessoas aqui ligadas à arte. Eu sou engenheiro civil, portanto, um bocado distante das coisas relacionadas com a arte, mas já disse há bocadinho que estava curioso em relação a como é que os artistas pensam poder contribuir para resolver os problemas que neste momento afetam a cidade de Lisboa, e não só a cidade de Lisboa, o Porto e outras cidades antigas do país, face à grande pressão do investimento no setor imobiliário. No setor do imobiliário, da construção e do turismo. São três lobbies poderosíssimos que têm recursos financeiros vastíssimos e uma capacidade de intervenção muito grande. Eu tenho para mim que essa capacidade de intervenção pode ter impactos positivos. Há muitas coisas positivas que o investimento no imobiliário pode conseguir. Mas também tem, frequentemente, grandes impactos negativos. E nós estamos a assistir aqui em Lisboa, no Porto, em particular nos centros históricos, nos bairros históricos, ao resultado desses impactos negativos que o investimento imobiliário pode ter. Agora, nós o que queremos fazer no Fórum do Património é mobilizar os cidadãos para que os impactos positivos sejam valorizados e o próprio investidor no setor imobiliário se sinta motivado para aplicar a sua dinâmica e os seus recursos humanos e financeiros em projetos que tenham impacto positivo sobre os locais onde eles têm lugar. Portanto, a razão de apoiar esta nossa iniciativa tem a ver também com a necessidade de nós queremos divulgar o próximo Fórum do Património, que vai ser lugar na cidade de Aveiro, em colaboração com a Universidade de Aveiro, em 14 de novembro, e gostaríamos que todos vós contribuísseis para divulgar esta iniciativa. Se tiverem tiverem contacto connosco através do Facebook e também, dentro de algumas semanas, através do Instagram, vão surgir notícias relacionadas com a reabilitação urbana, relacionadas com boas e más intervenções que podem resultar dessa tal dinâmica do negócio imobiliário, e gostaríamos que, mais perto da data da realização, estivessem ainda com mais atenção, porque depois gostaríamos que participassem, juntamente com os jovens da Universidade de Aveiro, participassem o fórum vai divulgar contigo em Aveiro, na Universidade de Aveiro, em 14 de novembro deste ano. Muito obrigado pela vossa atenção.
We're here to talk about a few different things, selected from the kind of barrage of subjects that was in that textual introduction to this event. I think that introduction kind of frames the entire series, but each conversation needs to stay a little bit more focused or we'll be here for the entire day. Tonight then, I chose to kind of zero in on three main themes, and I'll try to maintain focus on those themes as best I can. The first one being, of course, and this kind of will be the thread through all of them, is gentrification. But let's be careful how we talk about it. It's not a question of are we or will we or should we, because yes, the answer is yes. We will, we are, we should, it's happening. It can be done well or it can be done poorly. And so the question is, how can we be active agents to ensure that in Lisbon, gentrification is done as well as possible? Gentrification is something that people do. It's not something that happens that's beyond the control of human beings. We are human beings, so it's a question of being conscious of the process. The second question, and the second issue that I think is fascinating and problematic is this idea of glocalization, which is our title for the talk tonight. Did anyone other than me not know this term before the publicity for this event? Anyone? I was not familiar with this concept of glocalization, so I asked my Uncle Google, as I always do. And Uncle Google tells me that glocalization is a sort of buzzword from business and tech and entrepreneurship circles. That's where this idea comes from. The first hits on Google are sources like Investopedia, Business Dictionary, and Search CIO. That's where we're getting our main information about globalization. And according to sources like these, glocalization is, quote, the practice of conducting business according to both local and global considerations. Or, quote, glocalization is products or services designed to benefit a local market while at the same time being developed and distributed on a global level. So, I just want to step back for a minute and look at this frame and notice that these particular definitions and the sources from which they come put a fine point on the danger that we face and the solutions that I personally think we need to seek, and we can debate all of this as we go. But the concept of glocalization is specifically an approach to business practices. An approach to business practices is not necessarily a bad approach, but it is certainly not the only approach. And it may or may not be the best one. Business people and entrepreneurs do many things well, but that set of skills is a specific set of skills. Selling something, loaning something, products and services, markets and distributions, but in the end, geared toward generating profit for company owners and shareholders. That's what this is about. People who are good at these things are not necessarily good at everything else, like governing, educating, protecting collective interests or promoting general well-being, or certainly nourishing spiritual life or the arts. Different skill sets, different philosophies, different needs. We're here because we're interested in values that cannot be measured in GDP. So I think it's worth being aware and questioning whether a paradigm formed in the world of entrepreneurship is necessarily the best starting point for what we aim to do. If our interests lie with culture and with community, glocalization in the context of gentrification certainly represents an opportunity for many, and it represents a crisis for many others. And that's what we're here to unpack. Is there a version of glocalization that nourishes culture? We're talking about, yes, globalization, internationalization, multiculturalization, diversification, all of these things if possible without colonization, but not toward the end of generating profit. Are we on the same page? The answer might be no. I don't know. Focus number 3 for tonight's discussion. Question is, who are we talking to? Who Who are we talking about, and who are we? We're a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. And so when I put this frame around the discussion tonight, this is not necessarily meant to exclude anyone, to put anyone out. It's just about the focus of tonight's questions, the focus of tonight's conversation. Tonight, let's keep our focus on artists, on musicians, on writers, on actors, etc. as a class. I think of them as culture workers. So these are defined as people who are engaged with the arts and humanities as our primary source of income. In addition to being artists, musicians, or writers, we may also be, for example, teachers, or gallerists, or a number of other things, but our livelihood comes from the theories and practices of the arts. This class, for purposes of the present conversation, does not include people who make their primary living in some other sector, in business, in real estate, in banking, in advertising, in tech, or who, for example, primarily live off of the wealth of others. Such people are often lovers of the arts, and they are also crucial to the overall discussion that we want to have, but those concerns are different. Their options for participation and intervention will be different, and so the questions and answers for them will be different. They are positioned very differently in relation to the wave of gentrification. Tonight, we're keeping our focus on the artists and those of us whose work is primarily geared towards supporting them. Fair enough? Fair enough? More or less? Okay, so within these frames, I'm going to try hard to keep us on schedule. I will fail, I warn you in advance, but I do have my clock here, and I'm the only one that has permission to have my phone out. Everyone else, phone's away, no Instagramming, no nothing. No, I'm just kidding. So what we're going to try to do is, I prepared a few questions for the panelists. They have a vague idea of what those questions are going to be about, so they put a little bit of thought into it, but if I surprise them, whatever, we're not being rigid, they can go off and talk about if they think that something is related but more relevant perhaps, they're welcome to go there. So I'll ask you each the questions more or less as you've been warned. You have, if you need it, 6 minutes to respond, which is a long time, sort of. After which we're going to try to give the other panelists 4 minutes or so to discuss whatever your response was. I'll keep track, more or less. If I kind of interrupt you and tell you your time is running out, just bear with me, go with me. The idea is to keep the whole panel discussion to more or less 40 minutes. And then after the main panel, depending on the time, and we'll try to see how everybody's feeling at that time. If there are questions, we'll take questions from the audience and open the discussion to everyone. And then again, after that, depending on time and temperature, we may have a little concluding section where the panelists can give us specific instructions for actions to take. And from there we'll see. But we're aiming to keep this to an hour total, and we started, what, 15 minutes ago? 20 minutes ago? I'll do my best, guys. I'll do my best. We're already running a bit late, but this is part of my job. That's part of why I'm here. Brief introductions of our panelists. Warning that I cannot do them justice. I have so little time, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what they do. I encourage you to check out their names, look at their work online. All of them have their work represented online in various forms, and it is all fascinating. You'll go down the vortex rabbit hole, you'll not want to come out for weeks. Please follow up and see what it is they're really up to. Mendes is a geographer, a professor, a writer, and an activist who focuses specifically on gentrification. I'd like to focus on the fact that he works with Morar em Lisboa, which is an organization that has been working to halt housing evictions in the city. Crucial work, important work, and to bring public attention to the privatization of public spaces, as well as agitating for legitimate response from elected officials in a variety of cases related to the consequences of gentrification for the local population. An architect by training, Afaina de Jong makes architecture and art installations in galleries, buildings, and public spaces. From her Amsterdam-based studio, she aims to break down traditional hierarchies and disciplinary boundaries in the fields of architecture, art, and design, and in the academic discourses that interpret these and historicize them for the rest of us. right? More or less. On the end, we have Gabriela Salazar and Agapi. I'm so sorry. Dimitriades. Both of them are from Frame Colectivo. They are activist architects or architect activists, depending on the mood, depending on the day. What they do is they create actions, real actions, including workshops, guided walks, interviews, and ephemeral interventions in public squares in the city, aimed at the goal of public engagement with questions about our physical and emotional relationships with the spaces where we live our lives. So the real relationship between human beings and built spaces. Okay, so this is who we're talking to today. Come up with good questions, because they're ready. To get started, Luis is my first victim. So I spent a good part of my adult life living in New York City. As we, over the generations, have watched waves of gentrification wash over our neighborhoods, we have developed this stereotype, you might say, this expectation about how gentrification works. And the story goes basically first come the artists, then come the yuppies, and at that point the writing is on the wall. Gentrification is happening, the original residents get moved out. My question for you is, if this stereotype has been borne out in Lisbon, if this is the pattern that has been followed here, or is this in a different case? That is, do artists, musicians, and writers, culture workers generally speaking, seem to play a perceptible role in the process of gentrification in Lisbon?
Joanna, thank you so much for this very nice introduction. I want to thank Wozen, of course, Johnny, and especially Roberto Pelé, that have made this possible through the obstacles of the agenda. I feel very well. I stumbled with my head in this culture 2 times, but I feel the atmosphere is very positive. We have a lot of people that are interested, and this is very important. And Joanna just made an incredible introduction. I never been presented so rigorously as you did. And so fantastic.
I'm a little infamous for rigor.
It's amazing. So,
infamous, I said, not rigorous, infamous.
Going directly to the question because we don't have a lot of time. I mean, you're totally right. It's not a preconception. It's really a part of the conceptual model that science uses to explain gentrification. If you guys want to read more about gentrification, how and what are the phases of this process, you can try to buy in the Amazon, it's a book that it's around $2 now, or €2. It's from Phillips Clay, and it's called Neighborhood Change. It was the first time that a person, a scientist, did try to create a conceptual model with phases to try to interpret and explain gentrification. And in fact, what you are setting, the first phase that you mentioned about artists being the true agents of some kind of urban regeneration that unfortunately will end in gentrification, it's called by Philip Clay as pioneer gentrification. Okay? Emily Rose in the 80s, a feminist, Marxist geographer also, she said that we should look gentrification through the lenses of marginal gentrifiers. When we talk about artists in the sense that we all belong here, in the sense of non-market artists, right? More through in critical reality and in the emancipatory level, we are talking about a kind of gentrifier, but a pioneer gentrifier, a marginal gentrifier. It's a person that really connects with the environment of the inner city, of the atmosphere of diversity, social mix, also cultural mix. But when he enters in the neighborhood, the marginal gentrifier doesn't understand that he's a gentrifier. He loves the neighborhood, especially he doesn't own or buy a house to evict someone. He's very conscious of what he's doing. He respects the community. He understands the community. He loves to be in the community and to talk with the neighbors, the more genuine or authentic, whatever that means, sociology or social identity. He loves to be with the people, the true inhabitants, the persons that live there, the inner city for decades. But then there's another phase that comes along. And usually it's when the public opinion, and especially the public power, understands that inner city neighborhood, that it's traditional and historical for centuries, becomes an object of desire. Okay, it can be, can be an object of privatization and commodification. So in that sense, public power starts to engage in a series of strategies to attract private capital, to attract the UPs, to attract a new potential profile of new inhabitants, a new kind of gentrifier that is completely different of the first one. So I would say that emancipatory and critical first phase of gentrification, which is very important to create social needs and a different view of the city also, happened in Lisbon in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the 90s. And my master thesis proved it. Then the gentrification that we have now, it's completely different, and it's called in literature like super gentrification. And the first one was more local, and bottom up. This last one, the super gentrification, is completely commanded by huge forces like the global industry of tourism and the international flows of capital that none of us control or can regulate. Even the states cannot regulate what is going on. So it's a different scale of gentrification, and it completely connects with the glocalization theme of the debate, which I can then develop later.
Thank you. It's on your time. Good stuff. Among the other panelists, did any of you have a response surging to anything that Felicia was saying? Does anyone want to jump in voluntarily?
Yes, maybe.
Gabriela.
I have an idea afterwards, but you go first.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to not point, but really have as a discussion point the fact that we start by saying the artists call it the pioneer gentrifier, but the place, like the inner city center, we talked about the inner city center, and the things that it has specific characteristics. This city center that can be gentrified, and I would like maybe to talk about that, because it's not that, like, what is the attraction point? What is the pioneer gentrifier's attraction point for the inner city center, and what are the specifics of the inner city center that attract?
One strong theory that I've heard on this question is from actually has anybody ever heard of a little musician named Moby? Yeah, anyone? He says specifically, clearly, low rents. Low rents.
Yeah,
it's a very rational,
yes.
Very rational economic answer.
But then,
it's true.
Yeah, but that is the thing that
accessible. I mean,
exactly.
accessibility and also mobility.
Yeah.
And it's about, sorry to interrupt, but the inner city for the artists, and everybody can confirm here because we have a lot of fantasy here. It represents a symbolic space because it's different from the massive and homogeneous suburbs. Suburbs are the expansion of city for a lot of urbanists, architects, and artists. It's misrepresented, or it's a prejudice, but it's in part true because it's associated with the modern urbanism, the planification of the city, which is very, when we think about Anglo-Saxonic suburbs, it's a deaf space. It's not political. It's you do your shopping, you do your right. So it's more passive way of interpreting reality. The inner city offers a kind of very unique, excellent atmosphere in terms of social diversity and also cultural diversity. And it's more, like I said before, the artist sees it as a more authentic and genuine space. But the main reason, the economic rationale of it, low rents and big spaces, because in New York and other important cities of the Anglo-Saxonic world, we have very high level of industry in the inner city, not that we have here in Lisbon, and then we have a lot of open spaces that during the industrialization of the 80s were vacant, as you know, urban void happened, and we had a lot of open and empty space that could be improved by the artists to create galleries, to create studios. So it was low rents, but an amount of space, cheap space, even in the inner city, that created, for instance, the lofts, and that are one of the first places to be gentrified at the Soho in New York.
Let's give 1 minute to Afaina and then
Sorry.
1 minute back to.
Yes.
No, or the other way around, by the way.
Well, what I find interesting in all the 2 points is, so culture, where will culture be made in the future, right? Because this old style kind of gentrification that happened in the inner city, I think all of us, we are not able to be there anymore. So in this hyper-gentrification, does this mean that culture will be made in the suburbs? Because those are the only places where we can still afford it. I mean, I find it very, very a question that I'm thinking about a lot, because being pushed out myself.
Exactly. For me, there are 2 questions. One is that saying that artists go in the city center and start gentrifying it is not exactly, but it is a bit as if you say that in the city center there were no artists, which is a bit difficult, like as a discourse. And then the other thing is that exactly because of I'm going to shut up.
I actually meant to stop it before it actually made noise. I apologize.
No, it's okay. That's the very second fast thought is that if the city center is being like the urban renewal is very homogenic, then you actually create the suburbs in the city center. So where do you go?
For sure. Yeah. It's total turnaround, right? But I think the process that you're describing about the pioneer gentrifier is really a process from the 70s or the 80s. Like it's not now. That's not what's not.
I'll answer to that really quickly, okay? Because what interests me in this sense is that we are inheriting a process that has been copy pasted like 1,000 times in 1,000 cities.
Yeah.
And they are getting really good and really fast, and I think that's somehow the thing that we have to face now.
By they, are you referring to the speculators, the investors, the people who are looking
but also city politics.
Okay.
Is also copy-paste from other cities. In Lisbon, when we're looking for answers, that was the narrative. So we were looking for answers for the crisis, and you look around in Europe and you find some formulas, to create this hyper-tourism. And that copy-paste mechanism is because we have this gentrification going on since the 70s. And every time you copy it, you have like an enhanced model. You get yes, they or we or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Next question being for Afaina de Jong. You know something about New York City. You certainly know Amsterdam extremely well. So you have seen this process of gentrification that we're copying and pasting from other cities to now to Lisbon. I wonder whether your experience as an architect, as an artist, as an activist in other cities, you can speak to Amsterdam perhaps, which is a great example, have you learned anything from your experience about ways that culture workers and artists can, in fact, intervene in the process of gentrification once it's already well underway? So we're no longer talking about that phase where artists are choosing where to live and where to practice, but like once it's happening and they feel themselves getting squeezed out of the neighborhoods that they made vital, how can we remain active and participatory?
I mean, maybe it's interesting to kind of go through my thought process on it, because I think as an architect, I've always kind of been implicitly, part of the problem. Because I started kind of in renovating industrial monuments, so it's like, we have a whole train station, let's make it into, what should we make it into? And it's like, let's make it into like a shopping mall for creative entrepreneurs, it's gonna be great.
Co-working space.
Before co-working existed, and then of course we were always very, okay, we have squatters here, like how can we make sure that they come back? So we really designed the spaces so the people who were already there could really use the 2.0 version. But then again, what you see, you deliver a product, and after like 5 years, it becomes a monster because people start speculating with it. So even if you're not consciously being part of this gentrification model, your work is being co-opted. I think another phase in my professional life was when we had like an artist-run space in Red Light District in Amsterdam, and my brother had a radio station next door, and it was really like, this place is horrible, there's nothing here, you guys have, here, you pay 150 euros to the municipality, you can use this space. Basically, that's great, we'll do whatever. And I think, after you see very consciously that the municipality is just taking a little gamble for them, it costs nothing, like 150 euros to pay the gas bill. But we are creating culture there, and after like 5, 6, 7 years, it's basically like we changed the area. But was it actually for the better, I really felt like, not even that I had been used, but I felt like, shit, I am gentrifying, like we attracted all these different people here. So for us, that was really also a big point to kind of close the doors to our space, because we were like, we don't actually want to be part of this. And then I guess, the question is how are you part, how do you want to position yourself within this whole process? And I think for me, as someone who creates form or space, what really strikes me most is kind of the homogenization, but also the universal kind of design language that this gentrification has. Like it all looks the same. It hits the bar, it's always kind of woody with like a light bulb. Like it's aesthetic, And the aesthetic kind of says like, okay guys, you're safe here, in this environment. It's us. So I think really what I'm working on is kind of to make a language that is so explicitly kind of other than, kind of this universal. It's nobody's drinking latte. So I think that's the point that I'm at now. You're really trying to do it through design and really being conscious of not being used by kind of the powers that be.
So you
So I like that.
Can you get more specific? That's fine. When you say that you're trying to avoid this sort of homogenized international insert design, can you give an example? Describe a quick example
of my design.
Sure.
Okay, so for instance, we were talking about the project we did. We did a project in Brownsville, East New York.
Any New Yorkers? Other New Yorkers in the room? Anyone know Brownsville, East New York? Yeah. Okay, nice. So you should check out this project. It's awesome.
Well, it was basically about kind of, New York has this icon of the lady, what's her name? Statue of Liberty. So she's the souvenir of New York, she's the spatial representation of this idea of freedom, right? So the question was like, are there other souvenirs, are there other spatial representations of this city that we can think of, So we basically said, look, we want to look into these 3 neighborhoods in Europe in Brooklyn, who are the only neighborhoods that are not gentrified in this whole city. And why is that? Okay, so we go there, it's a lot of project housing, so it's not sexy, I guess, they're not nice brownstones. people don't see a certain like cultural quality that can be commodified, can be marketed. So it's basically that nobody wants to live here. So we basically looked around and started connecting to people and really found out what are the places that make this place special for the people who live here. Like what makes their culture in what places. And that we translated into this kind of public pavilion, a design for a public pavilion and kind of a souvenir. And it's like super, you can see it on my website, it's like a very intense thing, and it's very graphic. But really we took the kind of graphics that were already there in that neighborhood to kind of accentuate, difference instead of kind of the same. And we did the same in our artist stage, it was like completely, I don't know if anyone knows like Keith Haring's pop shop. It's like this really like white space, so we really made it like that. And in that you already saw that a lot of people were like, no, I do not want to go in here, and that is good because you already filter out kind of the people who do want to and I'm sure that every one of you would like to come into the pavilion we made there. So I think,
You raise a number of really interesting points, which I will not respond to because it's your turn. Whatever you'd like to respond to, I find and put on the table.
Karen, you can make a question. When did the pavilion was made?
Well, it was designed, it was never built. Or actually, the funny thing is, it was a souvenir. We designed it as a souvenir, so it's actually you can buy it online, and then you get like a miniature version sent to your house.
But the neighborhoods that where you get your inspiration,
Yeah.
neighborhoods, what happened to the neighborhoods? The outreach effects, I know that things, gentrification is just being very aggressive.
Yes, I used to live there too, and I lived there in 1999. And when I got back there in, I don't know, 2000 whatever, I couldn't live there anymore, right? But in 1999, I was also a gentrifier. I moved to Williamsburg, and people were like, you would never live here 20 years before, So it's also very strange. I feel, even in Holland, in Amsterdam, like, I'm also being pushed out and gentrifying somewhere else, You're being gentrified and you're gentrifying at the same time.
I know though that when I lived in New York as of 2011, East New York and Brownsville were still not, at least not visibly to an outsider, they were not visibly on the path to gentrification. Whereas other parts, Red Hook and South Brooklyn, definitely were already starting on the Williamsburg Trail.
Yeah.
I think the profile of gentrifiers is completely different.
Yes.
I have maybe a question about creating spaces with a certain aesthetic that connects all these cities of the gentrified, the process of gentrification. That is a very, it's on the one hand very scary, on the other hand it's difficult to escape. Because every time you think I want to make it very different, every time it's very different, it's part of the creation of that otherness that wants to be unique and actually feeds to the same narrative. And so I think that it's very important to find, like you were explaining, the references of people living in the neighborhood to what do we connect to in real life, so to come back to the scale of our body and the experience of other people. And I guess maybe at some point we will go back to the woody thing and say, oh, I want to go into that because that's not, that's going to become like the most not designed thing, Like, I don't know, like I think this wheel turns very fast from one thing to the other. yeah, but I think it's very interesting what you say about like going back to the real experience of people.
Yeah, I think because I
Actually,
actually,
well, if you want to take like 30 seconds and then Hassan, just briefly.
well, I know that you guys work a lot with participation, right? And it is also something that I did a lot and we're still doing, but it's a long process, and I start to notice that in the gentrification, as it's speeding up, it becomes more and more difficult to do those kinds of processes. So therefore, I think what we try to do now is like, okay, so then maybe it's about representation, because so many people who are here are not being represented anymore within the public spaces, like a lot of the gentrification also plays out in who can be in public space, like who is appropriate to appropriate here, so I think that is really what we're now trying to do is, for instance, women or like other people with other backgrounds, like they have never really been represented in space before. They have only big ideas of, the state or modernism that are represented in space before. So how can we go?
Or even no, actually, let you continue because you're actually leading in pretty perfectly to the sorts of subjects that make natural questions for Colectivo.
No, but, well, sorry. Can you fix your sentence?
No, I lost my track.
Because I'm able to or good enough to use the public space. That we're saying about.
Yeah, that to me is now one of the things I'm really interested in because I really know I see in the work that we get in that this is one of the major problems, through this kind of gentrification, people are being pushed out of, even the spaces where they can sit, not even their house, it's like you're not allowed to be present here anymore. And it's very euphemistic in a way of who gets to be present there and what you can do in this
always
space.
been like that somehow.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And then,
codes of behavior in different spaces, and the way that those codes include and exclude certain types of people.
and presence and appropriation.
And it may not be by law, but it's just sort of an unspoken law that everybody kind of agrees to without knowing or agreeing to it.
I feel the need to say something.
Okay, I will allow it.
This discussion is very interesting when we think about representation and cultural issues and cultural identity. But for me, I'm a Marxist geographer. So I drink and live develop. And for me, there's a perception that is not being mentioned here that is very important, that every urban space or social space is a production of a very specific economic system. For instance, if you see the evolution of the city and of the urban space, you can see that it reflects the mode of production that underlies it. So you have a certain kind of city in the revolution period, now you have a kind of city in the postmodern period, and now what we are seeing in all the cities all over the world that has a social capitalist formation, and there are a state of capitalism more advanced, is that we are seeing financialization. The capitalism in this last phase is completely financial. That's why you feel as an artist, you guys were completely respected by the postmodern culture in the 80s and the 90s. Because we were in the consumer society, and it was important to maintain that kind of imaginarium. Now you guys are no longer important if you don't look for the financial.
Finance capitalism has no culture.
No.
Exactly.
It has no culture. It has no content at all.
I think it has some kind of culture of, I don't know how maybe you can help. It's not just money. It's just a fetishism already. It's a kind of how much money does a Chinese investor or an Angola investor needs to be happy? Because for him, when we see the buildings here in Lisbon being sold by 1 million and in less than 12 hours, the next morning they are sold by 2 million euros, we think, with people inside, we think, does that really make a difference to the Chinese or the life of the investor? I mean, it's completely crazy.
But it's super interesting when he said.
And then I feel like it was one question to very collective.
But just to conclude back to what you started with New York, because I think you're absolutely right that the production of space is a reflection of kind of this capitalist cycle that we're in. But let's say kind of the Marxist idea of we produce something with like manpower and then translated to the city. Now we're producing in this capitalist framework nothing basically. It's just air, right? But then,
So renters become.
and that is what you see in New York at this moment. When I was there last time, it is empty. Like there are no real creatives. The stores are empty. The new high-rises are empty because they're owned by some Chinese rich people, I don't know, or maybe some other rich people. But, so we're, like the capitalism is empty, but also the city is gonna end up empty, and we're all gonna live in the suburbs.
Making them
It's a cycle, right?
I don't know,
That's before.
So going back to the idea of this broader cycle, the fact that it is in fact happening in Lisbon, maybe we can still turn it in a different direction than the path that was followed in these other parts of the world. I would like for the two of you, who have worked so deeply with the Lisbon community, to speak a little bit to your experience of, and again, I don't know if you want to talk about a specific instance, a specific project that you launched, people that you touched, an example that can show us how the arts and architecture can draw attention to the embodied experience of spaces, the embodied experience of cultural production, ephemeral experience, in a way that draws people's attention to the fact that these things can actually be used as tools for radical activism. Have you had any sort of best practice experiences that you can put on the table for us to make? With, starting from the premise that there is something we can in fact do.
Yeah. Well, to start, the things that we do are many times connected. We try very hard to connect theory and praxis and participation, but also really define our perspective as architects and as space builders. And because that sometimes is complex and we felt like it's 6 minutes, we're going to be there's no way we can explain this in English.
So, sure, 6 minutes.
Yeah, and so I prepared a kind of synthesis that can maybe help us start,
Yes.
or you want to condense that?
Yes, I will condense.
Okay.
Yes, and it is that we both started working and studying in Berlin, and we saw the gentrification process there.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2013, we came to Lisbon, where we are working in different urban spaces. Not always public, because you have to define public and legal definition, but urban open spaces. And urban open. Yes. And before we start building intervention, we built with a co-design with co-building. We first have to answer some very specific questions that are: how do we gather people together? And how do we create a common ground for everybody to have a horizontal dialogue without hierarchy? And how do we manage to include the maximum of different opinions for
backgrounds.
yes, and backgrounds in order to have different answers to a question. And in order to do this, we often invite artists. We prefer it vividly to work on site. So we transport our whole team and the carpentry workshop on site. And we invite artists in kind of an artist residency in order to co-create and co-answer with different mediums these questions. And this part is the most important part in the sense of creating all these new participatory methodologies so that there is a direct connection from the place and to the place itself.
Can I jump in there? Just because it's this part of the common ground creation is very important, and it's actually about language and translation. So if we are as architects, we are trained with a certain technical language that makes it kind of gives us a certain distance to other people, and sometimes when we start dialogue, we understood that many thought they could not participate in this discussion because they don't know this language, and so to build together, first we have to be able to talk to each other on the same basis, and so the translation process is one of the things that we understood that we could learn a lot from artists that actually. I lost your context. So that with different methodologies of exploring questions with artists helped us to create that common ground together, and then go on to the next phases that included like building and co-design
and decision making about where to build the building.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe that's one aspect about what we aim to do with architectural theory and like critical art research projects, combining them together. And then there are different things. Actually, I brought a bunch of stuff that I placed here on the table that I want just to say if I will present them very quickly, and if you feel like you're curious about them, come talk to me afterwards. I will explain them better. But these are just examples of ways that that we have collaborated with artists to create. I want to start with this one because of your project. Yeah, so these are mind maps that were created in Lisbon Living Room. Done that there was one artist illustrating the story that people that passed by and sat down with us. Told us about their experience in Lisbon. So what you are seeing are maps of Lisbon with a personal story. Each one of them explains which places are the important places for that person and the stories that were. So these maps they were filmed at the same time as they were being drawn, and there are some videos that with this 10-minute stories about Lisbon. And so this is one example that we developed. It's called Snow Studio, and it's really about going back to how do we connect really to Lisbon and what are the stories that are there that we don't hear in the slogan narrative of the touristic Lisbon. That is so shallow with no content. And so
can I pause you right there just to try to pull out some main points that I think you were making, which strike me as really powerful as responses to this question of how art can step in once the process of gentrification is underway. You were talking about the way that art has the capacity to create a common language when we're talking about people who don't necessarily feel as though they share a lexicon in common, who feel as though they don't necessarily know how to talk about architecture. Art is, in part because perhaps it's physical, it's visual, or it's musical, or it operates on a level other than language. It manages to bridge between languages. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Sort of.
And also, there is also another part that is very important, is that art is, if it is also exposure, it is also very generous. And people take part, feel it, and take part in it. It is a very generous gesture.
Mm-hmm. It's also
That is being-
expression. So if you have the example that you
This is our final panelist. She has a word which we're glad she has to say so.
So yes, I think. So it was just hello and bye.
She's very succinct.
Yeah, very fast. Okay, I will try it that fast. So I think on the one hand, the act of expressing through art is something that just invites this, it creates a certain space where sharing is easy. And so then from there on, there's the creation of the
I would like to stop you and see if one of the other panelists wants to add to this question and to respond to anything that.
I think this discourse is so beautiful. I feel so positive. I'm a structuralist. For me, you guys, we have to get together in urban social movements and really fight in the streets with boards, protests. I'm really serious. Some of the measures, just like 30 seconds, some of the big measures that we were allowed in the last year or 2 years were gained politically in the House of Democracy in the National Assembly. And that began when important, I'm not diminishing nothing of you guys are. It's different levels of struggle, completely different scales. This is about glocalization. So we need to have that multi-scale layer way of thinking. I think this is very, very important mechanism and in the bottom level, you know. But we need to get in touch with the representative democracy, with the politicians, with those who have power. Unfortunately, we cannot change things if we are away from power. Power is terrible, because power is always asymmetric. Someone has it and someone does not. But the only way, and I've been studying urban social movements for some time now, and I'm involved in an important urban social movement in Lisboa, and we only got the attention of politicians when we were mediatic and political and in protests, and gathered also these collectivities and tried to make some joint force against the pressure in the political level and using the media. The media was very, and taking the opportunity of the local elections. We took the window of opportunity of the local elections to pressure, so that a housing issue that wasn't at all being spoken in the public arena and in the public opinion, it gained so much attention that all the political debates started with the journalists saying, we're going to discuss the transportation and security and housing, and housing was the major issue. I think it's important to dialogue and connect this bottom-up initiatives.
I want to just briefly answer to the question that I also, for me, participation in political movement is very important, but the thing is that we always have the same question about who will engage in this fight, and how broad is your dialogue to create the movement. And that is always the weak point, where I don't believe that we can successfully create a big enough movement without a broader mass. And that is why I believe that first of all, we go back and this question about language is also, it's not only about architecture, it's also about politics.
Yeah.
It's also about, yes, how do we discuss these issues with everyone?
Absolutely.
You know?
To come up to phrase from American feminism, the architectural is political.
Absolutely.
Everything.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. I'm going to stop for a moment and sort of take the temperature of the audience. We're now at about 10 minutes to 9. I don't know who has dinner reservations and so forth. But can I see, please, a show of hands? Who actually has a question that they would like to pose to the panel? Okay, there are enough questions. I think we should go ahead to audience questions if you guys feel comfortable. Yes. And we're going to go a little bit past 9 for the questions, but that's okay. All right. Let me see those hands again. Let's start with the one closest to me. Can I have please your name and where you're from?
It's Joanna. I'm from London, and I lived here for 2 years, almost 2 years. And my question is about kind of the distribution of power, and also the other side of people who have some purchasing power, and actually, you know, while other people are out there in the position to buy property. So I'm thinking about, the first part of my question is the distribution of power, and how much power do you think is in the hands of these mega investors when it comes to Lisbon, and how much power is in the hands of kind of a lot of people who have big money and have the opportunity. I'm aware of the crisis, maybe not the word now, maybe my question is ignorant, but anyway, I can imagine that some of the people who were in the position to kind of ride this wave, and also take advantage of that. And the second part of my question is, from the position of a person that maybe has purchased power and opportunity to buy, like I see places here that are closing because of the rent going up, but at the same time, if these properties are not owned by mega investors, maybe but regular people, they also want to benefit and they don't want to leave money on the table. So they say, okay, why am I going to like cafe party? That was one place.
Yeah, where do they go?
The rent, because of the rent increase. And I can imagine these landlords saying, sorry guys, but I can make more on another business, so I have to let you go. So also, what is the role of these regular people, kind of who have a little bit more of the purchasing power, and is this personal financial gain always a reason for somebody else's misfortune, and that's just the way the world works? Or like, what is the role and how to do it? And also, when they're individuals want to better their lives, but want to do so ethically, is that possible?
Okay, so I'm going to try to distill this is a two-part question, if I understood correctly, from Eva, who's from Poland, has lived here for 2 years. The first part of was there a particular panelist that you wanted to direct this question for?
Anyone?
Okay, well, I would love to, I'm afraid only one of you is going to be able to respond, but the two parts of the question, if I understood correctly, first part was the percentage of power, more or less percentage of power that belongs in the hands of sort of foreign real estate speculators, as opposed to a percentage of power that is still in the hands of local permanent residents, right? So kind of a breakdown of what are we, in terms of who has the power to shape the experience of Lisbon right now. How does that break down among those two groups? The second part, I'm not quite as sure if I understood. I think, though, that Eva's question is fundamentally, is there a win-win option in this scenario where both those with property and the ability to buy property and control property, can they still make their profit without, forgive my language, but screwing over somebody else? Is that more or less your question? Can it be a win-win situation? Is that right? Kind of?
Yeah, kind of.
I understand what's the role of regular people.
Yeah, that was the thing that I was thinking about.
Process.
Who are you defining as regular people as opposed to non-regular people?
I guess professional real estate investors
Are regular?
right now.
Or non-regular? Just trying to figure out our
The
real.
president has another kind of profession that sees that opportunity to
Yes.
sell.
Yes.
For example.
Let's say I want to buy a property. Let's say I'm regular people. I'm also going to look for the window. What's the next cool area where the opportunity coming out? But then I also participate in the operation.
I think that it has to do, all your question has to do with ideology. Okay, so I think that after the post-crisis, post-capitalist crisis that we have since 2008 and 2009, justification, then you know something, a way we can see your example very clearly is in the locology. People that has a second apartment or a third apartment, even its own apartment, and they put it on short rent for tourists and went living in the suburbs. It's kind of a way to somehow, it's a way to escape the crisis, economic crisis. And that's completely ideological because the crisis legitimates, and that's the role of a crisis, it legitimates the sacrifice that the person do in a certain way of being blocked by the system and don't think morally, you just think in terms of economic reason. I need this money, so I will rent my house in the city of Afaina to a tourist so I can live better. I need it because I'm unemployed, so I'm going to live in the suburbs. I have my house of my parents in the suburbs, so I go to live there, and then I rent my house to tourists. I'm not complaining or criticizing this. I'm just objectively seeing it as a strategy of overcoming the crisis. So, and again, this has to do with the system, because the system produces the practical things, but also it produces the ideology and the way people think. And rarely we can escape it. Rarely. So, there's no win-win, or there's a win-win for the system. The system always wins. And what you can do, you can build, I think it's the major thing that unites us here, you can create resistance. Colectivo is they give several examples. You can create resistance, and especially you must understand resistance as something that comes. It's important to come from bottom, but to articulate and try to use the same strategies as capital uses, because capital, it's not a counter-revolution. Capitalism is a revolution, and it's completely changing the way we think, because it's not just economic, it's cultural. It seeks every main opportunity of resistance and co-opts it. Okay? When you guys are artists, when you see a kind of a musician that has a very special way and introduces completely a different way of seeing the music scene, when he is co-opted by the mainstream, he could be a resistance, and now he's not. A way of seeing resistance is, how can you be the Trojan horse? How can you be co-opted by the system? This is very post-structural way of thinking. How can you be co-opted by the system and then inside the system make it? That's for me, that's the key. That's something that philosophers from the critical thinking, I love this. This is something that post-structural philosophers like Foucault, Michel Foucault, and Guattari and others, does think about how can you not explode but implode, make the system implode by inside. And you guys have a very important role to do that.
I love that image. Yeah.
Can I just answer with one sentence that a suggestion would be like moving from thinking the particular and the individual to thinking, doing things collectively in groups. That's something that I think we learn, we need to develop tools to do it, and can be a way to answer a little bit the question about how can I use what I have to invest it in a way that is not just like negative in that system. And what you mean about like that element that we put inside the system itself, it could be like doing things collectively. I don't know.
Yeah, that we should collectively not pay taxes. I think. No, but I think also a lot of the gentrification issues also boil down to taxes in a way, because large developers get free land within the city to develop. They don't have to pay nothing. And all the moms and pop stores, they have to pay taxes. So it's already not. It's very weird. So I think also for us, I think this whole system runs on taxes. So a lot of the people who buy property in Lisbon don't have to pay taxes here, right? This is what's happening to the city. Maybe I don't know anything about it, but So I think also, collectively, like maybe that is starting collectively.
I would say that make the real estate speculators and the bankers pay a lot of tax.
Pay a lot of tax.
And then redistribute that money for associations, collectivities, galleries, artists, communities that improve social and critical thinking in our city. That's my goal, for instance, when I invoked that the touristic tax that we pay here in Lisbon, instead of promoting more offer in services for tourists, can be deviated in a very transparent way and objective way to the communities that have the burden of the external effects of justification.
So we're going to take one more question before wrapping it up. So let's see the hand time. Who had questions? You were quick on the draw. What's your name and where are you from?
Rui, I'm from Lisbon. Well, I'll not thank you, and not have time for that. That's so big. Didn't take that long. So, I love the translation part. I'm studying translation, and I'm all about that. But I also like the otherness part, and I wrote it with a capital O in homage to Lacan. And for me, this was quite problematic during our talk because we talked about defining otherness. I almost associated your spatial representations, finding humans, as creating new signs in a structuralist way. However, we had this form of common discourse, translation, a way to interact productively. So this for me is always a bit problematic because with otherness we find that we are always creating new stuff that is not that new, it's not that unique, and doesn't have the capital O. And with translation, my problem is that we use this. Then when we do find common ground, the common ground that we find is a bit void of meaning. I find this in emancipatory movements. When we have the correct operators, ones that everyone understands, they will no longer represent reality. So what I would like to ask you, and because you talked about creating new participatory methodologies, and you said that artists are active agents, so I thought about Jean Simon and blues is, can we create otherness in the translation space? Meaning, instead of focusing on the new lexicon, in the lexicon that fits trying to work on the immanent level, trying to create new concepts, and then of course we have to worry about the new language to describe them. And this would be, because you said instead of thinking individually, thinking as a collective. I will go further than this, because this doesn't seem for me too enough revolutionary or revolutionary enough, would be abolishing the individual, trying to work with that frontier, for example, so understanding, creating this new concept of an individual collective, everything smashed together. So it would be something on this lines. For me as an artist, I would go on this way. Creating a new concept. The otherness would be on the conceptual level, not on the lexicon level. Trying to fit these both things. Because when we create otherness, when we create new solutions on the phenomenological level, be it in lexicon or in science, artistic science, I think it gets it loses meaning and it is already to explore. So
What would be otherness?
Exactly.
What's the question?
Yeah.
I could.
yeah,
And then you can really just step in whenever you wish.
creating
But-
methodologies.
So I think maybe one big difference with creating the translation part, you say lexicon, like common ground doesn't mean fading ground. It actually is a lot richer than we are all adjusting and not saying what we want so that we have a goal. This is a participation effort. The things that you have to invest time. And time investment costs a lot of money, and it's a very slow process. And it brings a very, like you have to solve a lot of problems in the process. But it is a very important way, so that it's not about we all back up of our needs, but we all put our needs inside this common ground, and then we build something up new.
Yeah, I think it's not the way to see common ground like a common denominator. That it's like, let's find everything we agree on of all the words that we can understand. I think that's not the right way to understand the creation of common ground, because you exclude the human experience of creating trust, of creating like understanding for the world of the other person that moves and understands things in a very different way than I do. And so I have to adjust to that. So it's not only that we find same words to things, but it's that we learn to deal with each other too. So I think creating common ground is really, to me, it is it's work that we have been shying away from doing, like with this individualism, and it's easier if we have a business plan, a career, and it's just me that has to move. It's easier than if we all have to move in some direction.
So I think what we hear emerging here from both this question and the responses to it, as well as threads from the responses to all the questions throughout the evening, is something really, really, really fundamental that goes beyond the arts and culture workers and has to do with the sort of ideological distinction between individualism and the sort of more collective or communal approach, not just to property ownership, but to language and communication, shared lexicon, both in terms of whether we're talking about built spaces or literature or music or arts. I think what we're talking about is the idea that we need to transcend. And this is profound ideology. We need to transcend the idea that the best thing for me to do is the best thing for me, and think of each one of ourselves as a small part of something much larger. And from there, we can start to generate enough sort of groundswell, a critical mass of people willing to make decisions oriented toward collective good as opposed to individual self-interest. But this is big, this is philosophical, this is theological, it's some might say spiritual work, but certainly it is in many ways the work of the artists who, in visual language and auditory language, language that has less to do with words and more to do with senses, this is after all the field of aesthetics. This is where the artist has space to step in and intervene, and this is how art can be used as a tool for radical activism, for change, for intervention. I think this was an excellent first foray into all of these issues having to do with arts and the process of gentrification. I think you chose a fantastic panel, Johnny. And I mean, everyone responsible with the curation of this group of speakers, clearly you chose very wisely.
Thank you.